My father's voice was different on the phone that night. I had heard my father angry. I had heard him cold. I had heard him disappointed. God knows I had spent my whole life hearing him disappointed. But in 34 years, I had never once heard my father afraid. It was almost 10 o'clock. I almost didn't answer, because his name on my screen at that hour meant one of two things, and both of them were bad. But I answered, and he said my name, just my name, Iris. And it came out cracked and small, like a man who had walked a long way to get to a door he wasn't sure would open. "Dad, I need to talk to you," he said. Iris, I need your help." I want you to understand what those words meant coming from that man. My father had never needed my help. My father had spent 15 years making sure I understood that I was the last person on earth he would ever turn to for anything. He had a word for me. He'd used it since I was 19 years old. The disappointment, not always to my face, sometimes to my face, but mostly it was just the air in the house, the thing everyone knew, the label that got stuck to me so early and so completely that I stopped trying to peel it off. And now that same man was on the phone at 10 o'clock at night, calling me by my name in a voice I had never heard, telling me he needed my help. I already knew, somewhere, how this would end. That's the strange thing about telling you this story now, from the other side of it. I can see the whole shape of it. But my father couldn't. He thought he was calling to ask me to save his life. He didn't know he was calling to find out, at last, who I actually was. But to understand that phone call, you have to understand the word, the disappointment. Let me take you back. My name is Iris. I have one brother, Danny. 3 years older than me. And from as far back as I can remember, there were 2 children in our house, and they were not treated like 2 children in the same family. They were treated like a prince and a tenant. Danny was the prince. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it was the organizing fact of our entire childhood, as plain and constant as the furniture. When Danny played baseball, my father was at every game, in the front row, on his feet. When I sang in the school choir, my father was working, or tired, or he'd forgotten, or he came for the last 10 minutes and stood in the back checking his watch. Let me give you one day. One, so you understand it wasn't a feeling. It was a fact you could set a clock by. I was 12. I had a solo. My first one, in the winter concert, 8 bars where the whole choir dropped out, and it was just me and the piano. And I had practiced those 8 bars until my mother begged me to stop so she could hear herself think. I told my father about it for 3 weeks. I circled the date on the kitchen calendar and read. The same night, Danny had a playoff game. I already knew. Even at 12, I knew before I asked. But I asked anyway, because there's a kind of hope that keeps knocking on a door it already knows is locked. Both are at 7, I said. Mom's coming to mine. Will you come to mine? And my father crouched down to my level, which he almost never did, and he said it gently, like gentleness made it fair. Iris, your brother's team could go to state. This is a big deal for him. You understand? There'll be other concerts. I sang my 8 bars to a folding chair with my mother's coat on it, because she'd run late from work and slid in during the second song, breathless, and she was the only person in that gymnasium who was there for me. Afterwards, she took my face in her hands in the parking lot and told me I was the best thing in that whole concert, and I believed her, because she never lied to me. Danny's team lost that night, by the way. And my father talked about the umpire for a week. Nobody ever asked how the solo went. When Danny got a C, it was because the teacher had it out for him. When I got a B, it was because I hadn't tried hard enough to get an A. I learned the math of our family early. Danny's failures were the world's fault. My failures were mine. And any success I had simply didn't count, because a success from me was a fluke, and a success from Danny was destiny arriving on schedule. My mother saw it. Her name was Marion, and she was the only person in that house who ever looked at me like I was a whole person instead of a lesser copy of my brother. She used to take my face in her hands and say, "You are not less than anyone, Iris. Don't you ever let this house teach you that you are." She was fighting a losing battle, but she fought it. And then, when I was 18, she died. Cancer. It took 11 months from the day they found it. I deferred my first semester to be home for it, and I don't regret that. But I want to tell you what I saw in those 11 months because it explains everything that came after. I was the one who took her to the appointments. I was the one who learned the medications, who kept the chart on the fridge, who sat with her at 3 in the morning when the nausea was bad and read to her until she slept. I was 18 and I became, without anyone deciding it, the person who managed my mother's dying. Danny came on weekends, when it was convenient. He'd sit for an hour, hold her hand, tell her a funny story, and leave, and my father would walk him to his car and say, loud enough for the house to hear, Thank God for this one. I don't know what we'd do without him. This one. I was upstairs changing her sheets when he said it. I think, looking back, that's where I first learned the thing my whole life would be built on. That in my family, showing up quietly and doing the hard, unglamorous, unwitnessed work earned you nothing. And showing up for an hour with a good story earned you the crown. I did the 11 months. Danny did the weekends. And my father thanked God for Danny. My mother knew. Near the end, when her mind was clear between the medications, she pulled me down close and said, "He's going to be worse without me, Iris. He's going to put all of it on you. Don't let him tell you what you are. Promise me." "Don't let him get the last word," I promised. It took me 16 years to keep that promise, but I kept it. You'll see. She died on a morning in April, with me holding her hand and Danny not yet arrived. And when she was gone, the one hand that had been holding back the tide let go. After my mother died, my father stopped even pretending to be fair. The word arrived a year later. I was 19. I had decided not to go to the state college my father had picked out, the one Danny had gone to, the one with the business program my father had already decided would fix whatever was wrong with me. I wanted to go somewhere else. I wanted to study something he thought was worthless. I wanted, I think, to become a person he hadn't designed. We had a fight in the kitchen. The last real fight we ever had, because after it, there wasn't much point. And at the end of it, my father looked at me, not even angry anymore, just tired, just certain, and he said, "You know, your brother was going to be something, and your mother and I got you as the consolation prize. I spent your whole life waiting for you to turn into someone, Iris. And you just kept turning into a disappointment." I was 19. I want you to hear that, because I've had people tell me over the years, "He was your father. He didn't mean it. That's just how men of that generation talk." And maybe he didn't sit down and plan to break something in his own child. But he said it, and then he kept saying it in 100 smaller ways for 15 years. Every holiday, every phone call, back when we still had phone calls, every comparison to Danny, who by then could do no wrong even while doing plenty of it. I stopped going home, first for a year, then for a few years. Then it just became the shape of my life. I'd send a card at Christmas. He wouldn't send one back. Danny would post pictures of the two of them at a ball game, and I'd see them, and I'd close the app, and I'd go on with my day. I built a life he knew nothing about. And I need to tell you about that life, because it matters for what comes next. I did not fall apart. That surprises people when I tell this story. They expect the disappointment to become the disappointment, to prove him right, to spiral. I didn't. I think it was my mother's voice. "You are not less than anyone." I couldn't always believe it. But I could act like I believed it, and sometimes acting like it is enough to keep you moving until the belief catches up. I moved to a city 3 states away. I got a job coordinating logistics for a hospital system, the person who makes the impossible thing happen when a patient needs a bed that doesn't exist, or a transfer that 6 departments say can't be done. It's not a glamorous job, but I am very, very good at it. I am the person who does not accept that there is no way. I find the way. When everyone else in the room has given up, I'm still on the phone. I married a good man named Sam, who cooks badly and loves me well, and who, on the day I finally told him the whole story of my father, went very quiet and then said, "He doesn't get to define you. He never did. He just got there first. He just got there first." That's the thing about a word like disappointment when it's put on you young. It gets there first, before you have any say, before you have any armor. And then you spend your adult life finding out, slowly, whether it was ever true. By the time my father called me that night, I had spent 15 years finding out. He just didn't know the answer yet. Here is what had happened, though I only learned the full shape of it later. My father's kidneys had been failing for 2 years. 2 years! He hadn't told me. Of course he hadn't told me. Why would the disappointment need to know that her father was sick? He had Danny. He had his real family, the one that counted. He'd been on dialysis, he'd been on the transplant list, and a spot on that list can be a long, uncertain wait, longer than a failing body always has. The doctors had told him what they tell everyone in that situation, that his best chance, by far, was a living donor. Someone who would give him one of their 2 kidneys. And my father had a son. A healthy son, a son he adored, a son he had poured every ounce of his pride into for 37 years. So my father did what my father would always do. He turned to Danny. And here is where the story I thought I knew turns into a different story entirely. Because Danny said no. I don't know all of it. I know Danny got tested early on, quietly, and I know he was a match, and I know that somewhere between the test and the surgery, my brother decided he could not do it. Maybe it was fear. Surgery is real, recovery is real, living with one kidney is a thing a person is allowed to be afraid of. I'm not going to stand here and tell you my brother was a monster for being frightened of an operation. But it wasn't only fear. My Aunt Sylvia, my father's sister, told me later that Danny had said something in the kitchen of our old house that I have never been able to shake. He said, "I have my own life, Dad. I can't just put everything on hold for this. You'll figure something out. You always do. You'll figure something out. You always do." The golden son. The prince. The one whose failures were always the world's fault. When the moment came, the actual moment, the one that asked him to give something real, he had his own life. He couldn't put everything on hold, and he walked away. And my father, for the first time in 37 years, was standing in a place where Danny could not save him and would not save him, and there was no one left, no one except the consolation prize. Before we go on, if this story is pulling you in, take a second to subscribe. It's the only way to know when the next one goes up. And if a betrayal like this has ever happened to someone you know, tell me in the comments. I read them. Now let me tell you what happened next. So he called me. Now you know what I knew, standing in my kitchen at 10 o'clock at night listening to my father's voice crack around my name. I let the silence sit for a second. Then I said, "What kind of help, Dad?" I already knew, but I wanted to hear him say it, and he told me. All of it, in a rush, the way people confess things they've been holding too long. The kidneys, the 2 years, the dialysis, the list, the living donor, and then, finally, the thing underneath all of it, the reason for the call. The doctors say a relative is the best match. Danny can't do it. He's got his reasons. And I know I have no right, I know that, Iris. But you might be a match, and I'm running out of time. I'm asking if you would get tested, if you would think about donating. There it was, 15 years of the disappointment, and now he wanted my kidney. I want to tell you I stayed calm. For most of my life, calm was the only weapon I had, and I'd gotten good at it. But something came loose in me then, not a scream. I have never once screamed at my father, and I didn't start that night. What came out of me was quieter than a scream, and I think it hurt him more. "Do you know," I said, "that this is the first time in 15 years you called me because you wanted something from me, instead of to remind me what I am?" He didn't answer. "You called me a disappointment when I was 19 years old, Dad, and then you kept calling me that. You did it at Mom's grave. Do you remember that? At her grave, you told Aunt Sylvia I couldn't even grieve right. I heard you, Iris. You went to every one of Danny's games and you missed every single thing I ever did, and you told me my mother and I were consolation prizes, and you have not asked me one real question about my life in 15 years. You don't know where I work. You don't know my husband's name. And now Danny, your whole heart, the one you actually love. Danny won't give you a kidney, and so you called me." The words were out, 15 years of them, and they came out level and cold and precise, which is the only way I know how to be devastating. There was a long silence on the line. And then my father did something I was not prepared for. He didn't argue. He said in that same small cracked voice, "You're right. Everything you just said, you're right about all of it." I sat down at my kitchen table. "I have been a bad father to you," he said. I don't even have a reason that makes sense. Your brother was easy for me, and you were like your mother, and after she died looking at you hurt, and I turned that into your fault. I know that doesn't fix anything. I'm not calling to fix it. I lost the right to fix it a long time ago." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I know it's monstrous. To treat someone the way I treated you and then call them up and ask for a piece of their body. I know that. I think about it and I'm ashamed of myself, Iris, and I don't have anywhere to put the shame, and I don't have anyone else to call, and I'm scared, and I'm sorry, and those are all true at the same time, and I don't know how to hold them." He was crying. My father. I had never once in my whole life heard my father cry. "You don't have to do it," he said. "I mean that. If you say no, I'll understand. I'll understand more than you know. I didn't have anyone else, and I wanted to hear your voice, even if the last thing you ever say to me is no." I sat there in my dark kitchen with the phone against my ear, and I felt something in my chest tearing in 2 directions at once. Because here is the terrible thing. He wasn't manipulating me. I've replayed it 100 times, looking for the con, the angle, the guilt trip. It wasn't there. He had simply, finally, at the worst possible moment and for the worst possible reason, become honest. I need to think, I said. Of course. I mean it. Don't call me. Don't have Sylvia call me. I need to think, and I need you to let me think, and if you push me even once, the answer is no. Do you understand? Yes, he said. Thank you. Iris, thank you for not hanging up before I have to go, I said, and I hung up. And then I sat in the dark and I fell apart. I want to be honest with you about this because I think it's the truest part. I did not cry gracefully. I put my head down on the kitchen table on my own folded arms and I cried the way you cry when something that's been frozen for 15 years finally cracks open. Ugly. Heaving. The kind of crying that scares a person who loves you, and Sam came down and didn't say a word. He just put his hand on my back and left it there until it was over. I wasn't crying because my father was sick. I was crying because for 15 years I had built a fortress out of the belief that I didn't need him, that I was free of him, that the word disappointment couldn't reach me anymore. And in one phone call, one broken, cracked, honest phone call, he had reached right over the wall and grabbed the 19-year-old girl, who was still in there, still waiting, still hoping that someday he would call and say, I'm sorry and I see you now. He had finally said it. He just needed to be dying to do it. And that, somehow, was the cruelest part of all. That the apology I'd wanted my whole life had arrived attached to a request for my kidney. That I would never, ever know if he was sorry or just sorry now, in the way people are sorry when they need something. I cried for a long time. And then, the way I always do, once the worst of it had passed, I sat up and I wiped my face. And the fixer in me, the part my father never knew existed, the part that finds the way when everyone else has quit, that part woke up and started to think. Here's what I understood in the days that followed, and it took me a while to understand it, so let me try to give it to you clearly. I was not going to give him my kidney, not out of revenge. I want to be so careful about this because it would be easy to tell it as revenge, and it wasn't. If it had been revenge, I could have just said no and let him die, and part of me will not pretend that part of me didn't consider it. But it wasn't revenge, and it wasn't only the fear of surgery, it was this. For 19 years, and then for 15 more, my father had taught me that my body, myself, my whole existence was raw material for other people's needs, that I was the spare, the consolation, the one who was here to make up the difference when the real child fell short. And if I gave him my kidney, if I let them cut me open and take a piece of me and put it inside the man who called me a disappointment at my mother's grave, I would be agreeing one final time with the thing he'd always believed. That I was the backup, that my body existed to fix the family's problems, that when Danny failed, Iris was there to be used. I couldn't do it, not because I hated him, because I had finally, at 34, decided to stop being the spare part. But, and this is the whole story right here in this but, I also could not be the person who let a man die, not even that man. Because if I did nothing, if I said no and hung up and let it happen, then the word would win. Then I really would become the thing he named me, cold, hard, the daughter who let her father die. I would have let him make me smaller than I was, so I found the third door. It's what I do. When everyone in the room says there are only two options, and both are terrible, I find the third door. I wasn't going to give him my kidney, I was going to get him one anyway. I called the transplant program, not as his daughter, at first, as what I am. Someone who spends her whole working life navigating hospital systems, who knows how to talk to coordinators, who knows which questions open which doors. And I learned about something I hadn't fully understood before. When a person needs a kidney and has a willing donor who isn't a match, or a family full of people who won't or can't, there are programs. Paired exchange, donation chains, a whole quiet architecture built by people trying to solve exactly this problem, where donors and patients who don't match each other get linked into chains with strangers all over the country, so that one person's willingness to give can ripple out and save someone they've never met, while someone else's gift comes back around to the person they love. My father hadn't pursued any of it seriously. He'd been waiting for Danny. He'd put all his hope in the sun, the way he always had, and when the sun failed, he'd simply started to sink. So I became the person on the phone who does not accept that there is no way. I registered him properly. I chased down his records. I found the coordinators, the programs, the registries. I learned the language of it and I spoke it fluently, and I did not stop. I spent my evenings and my weekends on it. I made his fight my project the way I make impossible transfers my project at work, with a cold, relentless competence that my father had never once suspected the disappointment might possess. and I did it quietly. I didn't tell him. That part matters. For those weeks, my father thought I had said no. He thought I had thought about it and decided to let him go, and this is the thing. He never once pushed. He kept his promise. He didn't call. He didn't send Sylvia. He sat in his silence, believing his daughter had refused him, and he did not blame me for it, and I found out later he told Sylvia, "She has every right. I earned this. He earned this." He thought I was leaving him to die, and he decided he deserved it. He had no idea that every night, 3 states away, the daughter he'd thrown away was on the phone fighting for his life. It took 19 days. 19 days of dead ends and callbacks and forms and near misses. 19 days of me refusing to hear the word no. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang at work, and it was the coordinator, a woman named Denise, who by then knew my voice, and she said, "Iris, we found a match. It's a chain. It's complicated, but it works, and it's real, and your father has a donor." I had to sit down in a hospital stairwell, the same kind of stairwell I walked through 50 times a day, and put my head between my knees. A stranger, somewhere, had agreed to give a piece of themselves to a man they would never meet, and through the chain, that gift landed on my father. A man was going to live because of a web of kindness between strangers that I had spent 19 days weaving. I didn't feel triumphant. I keep telling you that in this story in the shape of my life, and it keeps being true. I felt wrung out. I felt something enormous and complicated that I didn't have a word for. And then I called my father. He answered on the first ring, the way you answer when you've been afraid of the phone for weeks. "Iris? You have a donor," I said. Silence. "What?" "You have a donor, Dad. It's arranged. It's real. It's happening. You're going to be okay." "I don't?" "How?" Danny said there was no one. The list was. "It's not the list," I said. "It's a paired chain. Someone's donating on your behalf and you're getting a kidney from someone else in the chain. It took some doing." I paused. "I've been working on it for a few weeks." The silence on the other end of that phone was the loudest silence I have ever heard. "You," he finally said, "you did this. Yes, you've been. All this time, you've been." His voice broke completely. "I thought you said no. I thought you decided to let me." "I did say no to giving you my kidney," I said. "I meant that. I'm not giving you my kidney, Dad. But I wasn't going to let you die either, so I found another way. That's what I do. That's who I actually am. You just never bothered to find out." The surgery happened 3 weeks later. I flew home. I hadn't been home in 6 years. And here's the part where the whole thing came out into the open, in front of everyone, because these things always do. The waiting room was full of family. Aunt Sylvia, cousins, old family friends, and Danny. Danny was there. He came up to me by the coffee machine, my golden brother, and he had the nerve to say, "Hey, Iris, good of you to show up. Crazy how it all worked out, huh? Someone came through with a kidney at the last minute." And I looked at my brother, and I understood that he didn't know. Nobody had told him. My father, out of some last shred of something, hadn't told the family how the donor was found. And Danny genuinely believed it was luck. A last-minute miracle. Nothing to do with anyone in that room. So I told him. Not cruelly. I didn't need to be cruel. I just said it, level and clear, the way I'd said everything to my father that first night. "It wasn't luck, Danny. There's no last-minute list miracle for a case like Dad's. I registered him in a paired donation program. I spent 19 days on the phone finding a chain that would work. The kidney he's getting right now is there because I put it there." The room went quiet, the way rooms do. Aunt Sylvia was staring at me. The cousins were staring at Danny. And Danny, who had his own life, who couldn't put everything on hold, who told our dying father he'd figure something out. Danny had no idea what to say. "You wouldn't give him your kidney," I said. "That's your right. I didn't give him mine either, and that's my right. But you told him you couldn't help him, and then you went home, and I found him a way to live. So please, don't stand at this coffee machine and tell me it's crazy how it all worked out." I didn't raise my voice. Not once. I didn't have to. Everyone in that room had spent 37 years watching my father crown my brother and dismiss me. And in about 90 seconds, at a hospital coffee machine, they all watched the whole thing turn over. The prince had run. The disappointment had come through. My father recovered. The new kidney took. His color came back. His strength came back. He became, physically, a well man again. And a few weeks into his recovery, when he was strong enough to sit up and talk, he asked to see me before I flew home. I went to the house. The old house. The kitchen where he called me a disappointment when I was 19. The pencil marks were still on the doorframe, and only Danny's were labeled. He was in a chair by the window, thinner than I remembered, older. He looked at me for a long time. "I don't understand you," he finally said. And there was wonder in it, not cruelty. "I was awful to you. I was awful to you for years, Iris, and I know it, and you knew it, and you had every reason on earth to let me go. And instead you saved my life, and you didn't even take the credit. You didn't do it, so I'd owe you. You just did it, and you were going to let me think it was luck. I don't understand you. Who does that?" And I looked at my father, and I felt the strangest thing. I felt free. "Someone Mom raised," I said. "For 18 years, before you got to finish the job." He flinched. "I need to say something," I told him, "and then I'm going to go home, and I need you to just listen, the way I listened to you that night." He nodded. "I didn't do this to come back," I said. "I want to be really clear about that because I think you're sitting there hoping this is the start of something. It isn't. I didn't save your life so I could be your daughter again. I saved your life so that I could look at myself for the rest of mine and know I'm not the thing you said I was. Iris, you called me a disappointment for 15 years, and the worst part, the part I'm only now letting go of, is that a piece of me believed you. I spent my whole adult life trying to prove that word wrong. And somewhere in these last few weeks I realized I don't have to prove anything. Not to you, not to anyone. I was never the disappointment, Dad. I was just the child you decided not to love, and those are completely different things, and it took me 34 years to know the difference." He was crying again, quietly this time. "You bet everything on Danny," I said. "Your whole heart, for 37 years. And when the one moment came that actually asked him to be the son you built him up to be, he had his own life. He couldn't put everything on hold." I let that sit. "You spent your whole life sure you'd raised one real child and one consolation prize. I hope someday you understand that you had it exactly backwards. Not so you can feel guilty. You've got enough guilt, and it doesn't help me. I just hope you understand it, because it's true." I stood up. "I'm glad you're alive," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not glad enough to come back. Both of those are true, and I'm done pretending a person has to pick one." And I walked out of that kitchen, past a doorframe with only my brother's name on it, and I drove to the airport, and I did not cry. Not because I was cold. Because for the first time in 15 years, there was nothing left in me that needed him to see me. We are not close now, my father and I. He calls, sometimes, real calls. He asks about Sam. He learns Sam's name, finally, at 59 years old. He asks about my work. He listens to the answers. It's not a reconciliation. I won't lie to you and tell you the movie ending, where the father and the daughter heal and everything the years broke gets mended. Some things don't mend. 15 years is 15 years. A word like disappointment said to a 19-year-old doesn't dissolve because the man who said it got old and scared and sorry. But we talk, carefully, like two people who have agreed to stop pretending. And Danny and my father are different now. Something broke there that I don't think comes back. My father looked at the son he worshipped, in the one moment that counted, and saw him run. You can't unsee that. He crowned Danny for 37 years, and the crown didn't survive 19 days of a real test. I don't take pleasure in it. I want you to believe me about that. I would have rather had a brother who showed up and a father who saw me all along. I would have traded all of it for that. But you don't get to choose which family you're given. You only get to choose who you become inside it. I've told you all of this, and I want to be honest with you about why. It isn't to make my father a villain, though he did villainous things. And it isn't to make myself a hero, because I'm not one. I refuse to give the man my kidney, and I'll let you sit with whatever you think about that, the way I've had to. It's about the word, the disappointment. Because here's what I've learned, and it's the only thing I really have to give you. When someone puts a word like that on you, especially when you're young, especially when it's someone whose love you needed to survive, that word does not describe you. It describes them. It describes the exact size and shape of their failure to see you. My father spent 15 years telling me I was a disappointment, and then he got sick, and the son he was so proud of walked away, and the daughter he threw out found him a way to live. And in that, without either of us wanting it to, the truth finally stood up in the room and spoke. He was never disappointed by who I was. He was just too busy worshiping who Danny wasn't to ever once look at me. So if there's someone in your life who decided early and cruelly what you were, a burden, a letdown, the one who turned out wrong, I want you to hear this from someone who wore that word for half her life. You are not the thing they named you. You are the thing they were too small to see. And one day in the strangest room, at the worst possible hour, life is going to ask the question of who really shows up. And when it does, You already know the answer. You were never the disappointment. You were only the one they never learned how to love. And those are not the same thing at all. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the ones still coming. And tell me, what would you like the next story to be about? I'll be reading you in the comments.